To Bob Monkhouse on Room 101 in half an hour. First, the Beatles, the Likely Lads, and a touch of satirical frost.
Tonight we're watching what we watched between the 24th and the 30th of June 1967, a time when the Americans were attacking a third world country and people were protesting in the streets. Ah, how times have changed. 1967 was the heart of the swinging 60s, a time of free love, of sexual liberation. So what's on the front of the TV Times? A nun. And on the Radio Times, a satellite dish. In the permissive society, we were banging people up for smoking pot. We were astounded by the revelation that young girls fancied pop stars.
It's easy. All the girls do.
Our entire world was so psychedelic, it was all in black and white. And everybody was fab and groovy. The 60s saw a boom in radical politics and satire. David Frost, in his show The Frost Report, was so thoroughly anti-establishment that in 1992, when Frost was offered a knighthood, he had no choice but to accept it.
Say hello, good evening and welcome, Sir David Frost.
At that time in 1967, I was doing The Frost Report. Subjects like The Frost Report on authority, on sin, on women, on education, on those subjects.
I suppose when one does think of authority in England, one does think first of the law, even if our courtrooms never quite come up to the standards of the courtrooms we see on television.
I shall now pronounce sentence.
David was a wonderful spotter for talent. He was persuasive in acquiring people and persuading them to come and work on his programs.
I assembled with James Gilbert, the producer, a terrific cast. John Cleese's first ever television series, Ronnie Corbett's first ever television series, and then Jimmy Gilbert knew Ronnie Barker, who had not yet starred in a series.
Silence in court. If there is any more noise, I shall have to ask the orchestra to leave.
And Julie Felix was the singing.
Mama's taking us to the zoo tomorrow.
Some people wrote to the BBC, does Julie Felix have any legs? Because I was always on this stool, and I was singing like this, and all hell was breaking loose all around the studio. They were setting up this sketch, they were doing that, and things were falling down. And I was going, Mama's taking us to the zoo tomorrow.
We can stay all day and go to the zoo, zoo, zoo.
And I remember John Cleese, one time I found him in tears because David had decided not to use one of the sketches that he'd spent all night writing, you know, and it was that immediacy of being right on the pulse of what was happening.
I won't say my wife is ugly, but...
Last time I saw a face like that, Tarzan was feeding it bananas.
When she comes into the room, the mice jump up in the chairs.
At our wedding, everybody kissed the groom.
In the decade of peace, love and understanding, 60s satellites were mainly used for spying on each other. But the BBC came up with an ambitious project.
Our World began as a concept in the mind of Aubrey Singer, who at the time was head of features and science at BBC Television. And he'd been responsible for organising the European end of the first satellite programmes from across the Atlantic.
Using satellite technology, they tried to bring the world closer together by making a television show, Our World, with contributions from 30 countries around the globe.
This should be a moment in television history, because this programme will bring together more places throughout the world than has ever been possible before.
It would be the first time a single TV programme would circumnavigate the Earth. Technologically, it would be an impressive achievement. 4 satellite systems would be used, with 1 million miles of phone wires beaming pictures some 100,000 miles to 170,000 TV sets.
And here in London, England, is the centre of the web, the control room of the whole programme.
And it would reflect the harmony of the world community by kicking off with births in 5 continents. But the happy hippie philosophy of Our World wasn't reflected in the real world.
Our World was going to circle the globe for the first time. Now, it won't quite do that. because for political reasons the Russians and a few other countries have withdrawn. It's a pity, but there it is.
Because of Western support for the Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip, at the 11th hour the Russians said a big "niet" to our world. It's a pity, but there it is.
To have a program that in the end fell apart because the Soviet bloc wouldn't take part at the last minute. I mean, it was a major disappointment to the makers. As a viewer, I thought it was a Euro pudding.
The poor, suffering TV viewers of the Eastern Bloc missed out on seeing all this. A traffic jam in Paris, a Japanese scientist with a beaker and some shrimps, and an attempt on the world butterfly record in Canada.
1066, it is just shy of the world record.
I don't know. If I wanted to see a girl swim up and down and fail to break the world record, I'd go to my local leisure centre.
And in London, they're a recording studio where the Beatles are in the middle of a recording session.
So, could the Beatles save our world? What we needed was an international rescue.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thunderbirds are go.
I say, open this door at once. We're British.
Come in, Parker. Come in.
That Sunday on ITV, Lady Penelope had been kidnapped in Paris.
First.
I'm truly trapped.
Her chauffeur Parker saved the day by somehow avoiding that Parisian traffic jam.
I knew Parker wouldn't let us down.
If you couldn't afford a pink roller like Lady Penelope, then for £606 you could always buy a Vauxhall Viva.
Fly Viva to 40 in 7.7 seconds. She's the 1.1-litre mile-eater. And you feel Dolly Rocket.
Oh, well, if it makes you feel Dolly Rocket, I'll have two. If you fancied something a bit smaller, Valerie Singleton could help.
I don't suppose there are an awful lot of people who don't like John Lennon's songs, but sometimes he does things that absolutely infuriate people.
What? John Lennon's Dolly Rocket?
He used to have a very sedate black Rolls-Royce car, and then recently he gave it the most extraordinary coat of paint. And if you want to make your model cars as eye-catching as that, you could do all sorts of things. I've done a whole fleet of them here.
Unbelievable but true. In 1967, Blue Peter was cool. Meanwhile, over on ITV, the nerds stopped popping their pimples long enough to watch Junior Crisscross Quiz.
The nickname Red is applied to people and countries of what political persuasion?
Communists.
Communist is right. Crisscross Quiz, yes.
Yes, communists. Those our world-ruining gits.
I'm afraid she's at the end of your challenge, isn't it? We shall be giving you a book token to remember your visit to Crisscross Quiz by. What type of book are you going to get?
No idea yet.
No idea. Well, perhaps that's the best thing. Go to the bookshop with an open mind, and I hope you thoroughly enjoy whatever you get.
Might I suggest a book about helmet head hairstyles? On Wednesday on BBC Two, documentary series Man Alive focused on the real lives of real teenagers and discovered that, shock horror, girls drank beer and fancied pop stars. John Percival's film The Ravers became front-page news.
1967 was the tail end of the great sexual revolution of the 60s. I think, actually, that a lot of that sexual revolution was a splendid opportunity for boys to exploit girls. But what we didn't look at was the boot on the other foot.
The ravers usually invade the dressing room in the interval between sets, begging for autographs or anything else they can get their hands on.
Have you met any pop groups before?
Yes.
And what happened?
I went with the drummer out of Jeff Beck, went with Titch out of Dave D, and snogged with all the frogs.
I'll tell you what shocks me. It's my own sort of po-faced, rather kind of puritanical presence, asking these questions as though shock horror. You know, it had never occurred to a nice boy like me that anybody could behave like this.
Does it worry you that you're not going to see them again?
No, it doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I quite like the idea. I like a boy to have lots of experience, to know about lots of girls.
I'll put as much as I can on it.
I think middle-class people didn't like to think that people behaved like that. Nice girls didn't behave like that.
So, kids, next time your mum tells you off for ram raiding or sniffing glue, just say, "At least I didn't snog Titch out of Dave D." If The Ravers was a bit much, you could always seek sanctuary with TVTimes cover girl Joanna Dunham.
We had a photo call, and there were all four of us, sort of in a sort of ring. And there were several shots like that, and occasionally they'd ask me to look upstage and smile. And then in the end, they just had one of me, which I think didn't go down very well, but it was too late.
But the drama which got us all chatting in the queues for our outside toilets that week was on the BBC. Every Saturday for 6 months at 8:45, we watched Susan Hampshire and the cast of The Forsyte Saga on David Attenborough's BBC Two.
David's channel, which was very much a reflection of him personally, reflected the arts, reflected documentaries, and reflected good drama.
A woman's always after the soul of a man. Or a child. Men are content with wanting bodies.
Yes.
To start with, it was thought to be crazy by all the other networks. Who would want a serialization that ran for 26 weeks, for heaven's sake? And then it went out, and it was a terrific success.
I wasn't being personal.
No.
Head a little more to the right.
What happened in those days on the buses and on the tube, the whole community was engaged in discussing what it was like, and the Forsyte Saga had that kind of profile.
What platitude will my portrait express?
Oh, don't you worry. There'll be one all right. Character will out.
Yes.
BBC Two's policy was not to be highbrow, not to be intellectual, not at all. It was to, first of all, produce programmes that were quite unlike anything in style or content that was being shown on any other network.
One of those was The Likely Lads.
The Likely Lads was a huge success on BBC Two, and I envied it when I was able to get the repeats for BBC One shown to a much bigger audience.
That week in 1967, Likely Lads Bob and Terry, played by Rodney Bewes and Jimmy Bolam, had decided to join the army.
I always remember meeting David Attenborough the first time he became the boss of BBC Two. David Attenborough came towards Jimmy and I, beaming. You know, he's such a nice man. And his hand outstretched, you know, and he said, "Hello, I've just inherited you two, and I'm so proud." He said, "I'm so proud of you two." And Jimmy Bolam said, "Who are you?"
Where are you going? What's this?
I'm going home.
Are you already?
No, I've been discharged.
What?
I'm sorry.
You're sorry? 3 bloody years! What? Come on, Daddy, we're waiting!
The lads came back 7 years later in the follow-up, Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. But on Thursday at 8, ITV viewers were asking whatever happened to the man from... By 67, Ian Fleming's TV spy thriller was rapidly descending into farce.
Uncle was the first of this kind of a show to dabble in the world of international intrigue and spies and so on, in a somewhat light-hearted vein.
What you see?
What you see?
By the third year, they really had gone into something that I didn't think was right for the show, which was more comedy than it was drama and excitement.
For a big gorilla, he's got a nice light foot.
We really slipped over the line from romantic adventure into farce on that one, because I believe I was dancing with a gorilla.
Robert Vaughan, who had been part of the Magnificent Seven, suddenly found himself in the part of the embarrassing one.
Later.
It was the worst episode in relation to the way the show was before that.
Robert Vaughan would have prayed that week's Uncle wasn't reviewed by Late Night Lineup, the telly show about teleshows presented by Joan Bakewell.
Late Night Lineup, as you can see, looks rather different tonight. We're not in our usual lineup studio. We're taking a night out to celebrate this, our 1000th edition.
Late Night Lineup had a totally open brief. Our basic premise was that we would talk about television, which meant that we would preview programs, we would talk to the stars and the author, and then on the night the programs went out, we would review them.
For that Friday's 1000th edition, all the regulars were there, including Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, who'd taken a keen interest in that week's Man Alive.
You say the ravers?
The ravers? No,
about the teenage teeny boppers, and enter the rooms of the pop idols and begin to undo their bras.
The girls take off the pop star's bras.
No, the girls take off their bras and ask pop idols to put crayons on their breasts.
The 1000th anniversary was going to be a very big party indeed, and we said we will ask everyone who's come on the programme before. One of our leading guests will be David Attenborough, because he was our great champion.
David, I feel kind of bashful. Being confronted by a person who's surrounded by red tablecloths like you are.
The 60s was when pop groups were coming into the studio a good deal and regularly, and of course they brought their habits with them. And there were times, and David Attenborough would bear this out, when the corridors outside the recording studio were so fragrant with what David always called herbal smells that you could simply get high just walking past the studio.
The one thing I'd like to ask you, because I'm on a sort of percentage, is why you smoke Silk-Cut Benson & Hedges cigarettes.
They're the only ones I could steal.
Every now and again I would go along this corridor and think, I don't think I want to know that that smells like it way it smells. And so I would actually tactfully pass the message down the way one does, saying, look, lads, you know, just watch it.
Anyone who was anyone had their brand of choice.
Guards reward you with full-size satisfaction.
And not a government health warning in sight. But Mick Jagger's choice of herbal cigarettes brought him something far more serious than a warning.
Jagger, who was wearing a primrose frilled shirt with pleated yellow lace cuffs, put his hand to his face as he was given 3 months with £100 cost. For a moment he looked like fainting, then prison officers moved forward to take his arms and help him down to the cells.
Mick Jagger was so radical and anti-establishment that when in 2002 he was offered a knighthood, he had no choice but to accept it. Another group painting it black this week were Jane Mansfield fans. On Thursday, the Hollywood legend was killed in a car crash in America. But who's this in the UK for the first time ever? Hey, hey, it's the Monkees! One of the first manufactured boy bands, these monkeys were way too big to dance with Robert Vaughan. They were at number 7 in the charts. Monkeys at 7, Turtles at 6, with She'd Rather Be With Me. Traffic was jammed at 5 with Paper Sun. At 4, Dave, Dee, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and the one who snogged that girl from the Ravers were OK. But at 3, the Hollies were very good. At 2, the country was getting the hump. And at number 1, Procol Harum. Go on, trip the light fandango.
As the miller told his tale, that her face at first just ghostly turned the whiter shade of pale.
Back on Sunday, still waiting for the Beatles, the audience of Our World was going a whiter shade of pale and rapidly losing the will to live. Sunday evening in the UK was still night in Australia. The only Aussies not in bed were the Melbourne tram drivers. Those trams, 0 to 40 in 2.5 hours, and you feel dolly rocket. The Swedes tried to show us a first-class example of someone canoeing. What they actually showed us was a first-class example of someone drowning. The French had murky footage of a man in an ocean-going submersible, probably looking for a Swedish canoeist. British TV had long prided itself on being the best in the world. Surely the excitement of Britain's first contribution would put Johnny Foreigner firmly in his place.
This is Magnus Magnusson reporting from the prize-winning new town of Cumbernauld.
A number of offers came in, and we wanted something to do with population, new town, building things for new people, and Cumbernauld was one of the most recent places at the time. So we thought, right, we'll go for that.
This visionary town is only 1/3 complete, but already part of the vision has been realized here.
We wanted to contrast the fact that this was right out in the fields, cows all over the place, and then this visionary new town growing in that place. So we decided to go for one family, which would show the kind of people who were growing there.
Mr. John Colley and his wife Annie and their 2 daughters came here from Glasgow 5 years ago to this split-level, all-electric house. And in this new hotel in the town centre, at just about 10 minutes to 9 on a Sunday evening, only 14 miles, but a whole world away from the crowds and the noise and the dirt that they knew in Glasgow, the new people of the new town enjoy the best of city as well as village life.
It didn't quite work out, Cumbernauld. The planning wasn't followed through very much, especially in the town centre. The town centre was always a bit iffy, and it fell into very bad times. It won an award from some business magazine called the Carbuncle of the Year Award, you know, the giant pluke.
So much for Britain's contribution to our world. Come back, drowning canoe man, all is forgiven. Sexually voracious Jackie Boardman was turning on her fridges.
Mrs. Jackie Boardman goes all the way with Frigidaire.
Mrs. Boardman and the Frigidaire had 3 beautiful baby spin dryers and lived happily ever after. More domestic bliss with John Junkin and Joan Sims in ITV's Tuesday sitcom Sam and Janet.
Sam and Janet was a very basic situation comedy. It was about a couple over the first flush of youth, obviously. It was Joni and me. And it was just their life together. They were a very companionable couple. Had kids living away.
I know. I did the rebelling bit when I was 16 too. Did you? Yes, I took all my dissatisfactions and frustrations and the urge to throw off the yoke of conformity and crystallised them all into one single symbolic gesture of defiance. What was that? I wore yellow socks.
It's that terrible expression. Clichés are clichés because they mean what they say. It was a slice of life.
There was a whole loaf of life on show in Coronation Street, where our favourite girls next door were Hilda Ogden and Elsie Tanner.
Well, any Rod, you wouldn't catch me going out with a Yank.
And the tragedy is she never did.
You'd get killed in the rush, kid. And if you're referring to that fella I'm going to marry, his name is Sergeant... Yeah, I'm going to marry him.
Oh, well,
congratulations. Thanks, kid.
I say, though, after you, when you've done with him, gone and I'll knock your threatens off your soap powder.
I don't somehow think I'll be finished with him that soon. Oh, if you're looking for her, you'll find her in the Rovers. Oh, Mrs. Sharples.
Being the top-rated programme in Britain, Corrie could claim to be the show of the week. But that title was used by a show starring Cool Cat singer Eartha Kitt.
That kittens purr, according to its needs. That some cats will fall, for a Riviera ball, or for the Taj Mahal, or for anything at all.
There weren't many black faces on TV in June '67, and those there were white faces blacked up. Sadly, that's what passed as wholesome family entertainment back then.
Take your seats, please, aboard the Minstrel Express, stopping at all stations to Musicville. With space so much in the news these days, our producer thought he would like to see what life was like on the moon.
The Black and White Minstrel Show was at its peak in the 60s. It had been wonderfully well produced by George Innes. Looking back on it now, it is, of course, a major embarrassment.
If I could hold...
At its height, the show was watched by 18 million people.
I mean, one is shamefaced at thinking that we could get away with a show like the Black and White Minstrel Show. At the time, there was some criticism in the place, but it was minute. Looking at it now, I'm ashamed that we put it on the air.
In 1967, the campaign against racial discrimination demanded an end to the Black and White Minstrel Show, and so the BBC canned it in 1978. In the news, plenty more dissenting voices that were ignored for far too long. Protesters were taking to the streets about Vietnam, where the Americans were entrenched in a bloody war which they couldn't get out of. It's good to see they've learnt their lesson. Meanwhile, in the Navy...
Why wait for colour TV? See the world for real in the Royal Navy.
If you couldn't wait to say hello sailor, then the Navy was for you. But if you couldn't wait for colour TV, then the Radio Times had some good news. It started next week. Dolly Rocket!
There were two networks preparing to go into colour in Europe, Germany and Britain, BBC. And the question was, how much colour programmes would you need to say you had really started a colour television set? And we thought that it had to be an hour or so every night, at least. I suddenly realised that Wimbledon was coming up, and we could put colour cameras in Wimbledon, and with 3 or 4 cameras, which was about all we had, we could produce endless hours and hours and hours.
Meanwhile, back in the days before colour TV, Our World viewers were getting desperate for the Beatles to perform. By now, we were watching Frenchmen poncing around in leotards. And rampant thespians were hamming it up in tights in Tuscany. Our World had hoped to bring the world together, and they did unite the world in saying, the technology is great, but please, please, please show us the Beatles in 14 different languages. And then finally, the Beatles.
This is Steve Race in the Beatles recording studio in London, where the latest Beatle record is at this moment being built up. Not just a single performance, but a whole montage of performances. With some friends in to help the atmosphere, this is quite an occasion.
Getting the Beatles was a coup for the BBC. It was a coup for Britain, really. It was perfect timing.
It was going to be an important show. They would have exposure all over the world, and it was wonderful advertisement for them.
I remember them being a bit dismissive about it. They felt they'd been not conned into it, but they felt they were doing it for corporation and EMI and BBC reasons.
George Martin managed to persuade them to stay on and go to the Abbey Road studios in London and put on their show. It was just as well that the Beatles decided to do that, because it became one of their great successes.
All right, here we go. Okay, Richard, here comes the text.
There's nothing you can do that can't be done. Nothing you can sing that can't be sung.
Playing All You Need Is Love for the first time ever live in front of a global TV audience, the Beatles are now seen as the undisputed highlight of our world. But letters of complaint flooded the BBC.
After all the culture on show in the other countries, the Beatles were the absolute dregs.
Faced with what's become a classic 60s performance, what the viewers of 67 wanted were more drowning canoeists poncing around under the sea in a traffic jam.
I remember John saying to me that actually the phrase, all you need is love, could mean 2 things. At one level, all you need is love, meaning all that everybody needs in the world is love. Love will conquer everything. Love is all you need. But if you take it another way and think about it, all you need is love. They've got everything. They've got riches, but really, they're lacking love. All you need is love.
The Beatles copped all that criticism from the BBC viewers because, like David Frost and Mick Jagger, they were so anti-establishment. Incidentally, Paul McCartney was so anti-establishment that in 1996, when he was offered a knighthood, he had no choice but... oh well, you know the rest. That was June the 24th to June the 30th, 1967. That was the week, if you needed love, you could watch Free Love, Brotherly Love,
All the best, kiddo.
Romantic Love, Divine Love, and 15 Love. Well, that was all pretty anti-establishment. I'll expect my knighthood any minute.